I'm Cynthia Rowland, and this is episode 120 of EO Radio Show. This is our 20th episode in a series of quick tips focusing on the details of state registration of nonprofit corporations. In previous episodes, we talked about filing in Delaware and California, which are the most frequently used by our clients, most of whom have a connection with California. Other episodes have focused on state filings in Nevada, Arizona, Washington State, Oregon, Alaska, Hawaii, New York and New Jersey, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Maine, Vermont, Rhode Island and New Hampshire, Florida and Louisiana, North Carolina and South Carolina, Kentucky, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, Washington, D.C., Michigan, Ohio, Illinois, and Indiana. We've also discussed Wisconsin, Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota. With the help of Joe Hilliard, today we look at the basic state filing requirements for nonprofit corporations operating in Virginia and West Virginia. You can find all the prior episodes on our website or at the Farella YouTube channel, where there's a playlist just for these state filing requirement episodes. We'll work our way through the rest of the states in future episodes. Welcome to the EO Radio Show, your nonprofit legal resource. Brought to you by the Exempt Organizations Group at Farella, Braun & Martel. My name is Cynthia Rowland, and I'm a partner at Farella. I'm a business and tax lawyer with more than 30 years of experience advising clients on nonprofit and charity law. Through this podcast, our lawyers and guests will discuss a range of legal and business issues impacting the nonprofit world because we understand you work hard every day to make your community a better place to live and do business. Many of our programs focus on the basics, and at times we'll do a deep dive into narrow and complicated legal issues. Again, welcome to the EO Radio Show. We're glad you're here. As I discussed in previous episodes, nonprofit corporations are one variety of fictitious business entities. Others include partnerships and limited liability companies. The laws of all the states prescribe certain formalities that organizers of these business entities must go through so that the entity can be regulated and subject to legal process as a person. Since business enterprises aren't natural persons, the laws have developed mechanisms for treating them like natural persons. This is where the state filings come into play. In order for the organizers of these fictitious entities to take advantage of the protection of the laws, they have to provide notice as to the legal name, the state whose jurisdiction they are claiming for corporate organization laws, a physical address where they can be served with legal process, and certain other information. In this episode, we aren't going to dive deep into the pros and cons for where to incorporate, but instead we're focusing on the ease of formation, standardized documents that are available, filing fees, and similar administrative matters. As with all the states we have discussed, if you do business as a nonprofit in Virginia or West Virginia, or solicit charitable contributions there, even if just through the nonprofit organization's website, the nonprofit may need to have a legal presence and be registered in these two states. For the details on these states, we welcome back Joe Hilliard. Joe is a senior paralegal at Farella. He specializes in formation and compliance matters for all manner of entities, and in particular charities that are tax-exempt under Internal Revenue Code 501c3. Prior to working at Farella, Joe worked in-house for several real estate development and management companies in Southern California, working on real estate purchases and vendor contracting. Hi, Joe. Welcome back to the show.
Hi, it's good to be here again.
So before we get into our usual format for these quick tips, I want to highlight for our listeners why compliance with these state formalities may have heightened importance in the current political environment. Nonprofits are often so focused on mission that state compliance falls through the cracks. The organizations would do well to make sure that all the required government filings are current, not just the federal tax status. The last thing anyone needs to be worrying about is trying to reinstate at the state level when the corporation is under attack or under inquiry from any outside source, whether it's the federal government or otherwise. Back to our regularly scheduled program. Joe, fill us in a little bit on any updates in the state laws for the states we've already covered, and then we'll launch into the Virginias.
More of a procedural one here in California, effective as of February 26, 2025. The Secretary of State changed its filing conventions for new entities. So in the old days, a foundation as a corporation would get a C before their number, and an LLC would just have a number string starting with the year, so it'd be 2025 and digits thereafter. But now, as of February, all new entities will have a B prefix before their assigned number, irrespective of being a corporation, an LLC, a nonprofit corporation, So the number itself will still be the same as they were with the LLC. So it'll be the B followed by the year, then followed by 9 digits. So that's good to know. Again, you were just talking about state compliance. You need to have that state compliance number because wherever else you register in the state, like with their AG here in California, you will need that number. And just to think that it's different as you form new ones. I know we have a lot of people that have more than one foundation, a lot of clients that have more than one foundation. And that's good to remember that your numbers will no longer look the same in the state of California as you form new ones.
Interesting. But that's not changing the current number. So any organization that's already in place keeps its C number.
You will keep your numbers. That's going to down the road potentially cause confusion as you'll have foundations with C prefixes and foundations with B prefixes both.
Okay. Well, good to know.
Yeah.
Anything else? What other changes are out there?
Yeah, in Texas, which we've talked about before, they've raised the cost of expediting business filing. So before their maximum used to be $15, and now it can go as high as $5,000 depending on what you're doing. That would be more geared up towards like a for-profit corporation than a nonprofit. But be aware of that if you are filing in Texas and you need something expedited, if your timing is short, to look, as they say, count the costs.
Yeah, good advice. All right, so on to our regularly scheduled program. We'll start with Virginia. How do we create a new nonprofit organization in the great state of Virginia?
In Virginia, it's the Virginia State Corporation Commission that governs their entity formation. It's not through a Secretary of State. And then for domestic non-stock corporations, they have a form SCC 819, which are simply Articles of Incorporation of a Virginia non-stock corporation. It can be filled in online and submitted, or the form can be populated, printed out, and signed. It's only a one-page form. It does not have a provision space for where you would put our 501c3 dissolution language. However, the directions do state, quote, if the Articles of Incorporation will need to include additional provisions, separately prepare and submit typewritten Articles of Incorporation. That's what we recommend here in California as well, just to type it up. When we do it, it turns into like a 2-page document here with about 9 articles to it. Same thing here. If you look at their form, it outlines the basics you would need to have on that. So, the name, your registered agent. It does have some quirks that would need to be added, though, as you put it into a Word version. Article 2 has a checkbox whether you will have members or not. The next article, which is Article 3 on their system, is a checkbox where other directors either have to elect their own successors if the members elect them, or if there's a different mechanism, and then that mechanism needs to be spelled out. That's different. Usually we don't talk about that mechanism being in the system.
Yeah, that's unusual because sometimes that changes over the life of the organization, and we're used to just dealing with it in the bylaws.
Right.
So it looks like in Virginia, you're going to have to go back and address your articles.
Right, you're going to have to amend and restate them for sure. Article 6 does need to name all the directors, so you will have to put those in your articles. And again, we're talking about revisions, potentially going to the state to revise that. And then for your registered agent who needs to be identified, the individual must not only be in Virginia, but they have to be either A, an initial director of the company, or B, a member of the State Bar of Virginia if you name an individual. So
interesting.
Yeah, it's not what you would think of. And again, all of those items would need to be incorporated into any typewritten articles that you put together and filed, or we put together and filed for you. Commission does have a 2-page PDF guide for guiding these issues. So it's helped so that you're not out on your own trying to figure this out.
All right. What about foreign registrations?
So for the foreign registration, they have a form SCC 759-921, and it's an application for Certificate of Authority to transact business in Virginia. This is one of those where the form is for both stock and non-stock corporations. It's just a 1-page, filed online or signed in original. It really is very straightforward and easy to go through. It asks for your basics for all of our foreign registrations. Name, where formed, the address, you're both in home state and then a Virginia principal office, and then Virginia registered agent. It does ask for the original date of incorporation in the home state and asks for all officers and directors to be named with a business address. An additional page can be added if there's not enough room on the form to get all your officers and directors. Here for the registered agent, as with the domestic, an individual must be an officer or director of the company and or a member of the State Board of Virginia to serve.
State Bar of Virginia, yeah.
Yeah, State Bar of Virginia. And the other big difference with Virginia, a certified copy of the actual Articles of Organization from the home state must be provided with the filing. So not a good standing, but an actual certified copy. You and I actually had this come up last week where we were registering a Delaware foundation in Virginia, and I had to go back and get one. So it's a good reminder, not all states are the same.
Yeah, good point. Down to some of the basic mechanics. What's the filing fee for these? How long does it take to get them back? Can we do things in a rush?
Yeah, so the filing fee is $75 for both the articles, if you're domestic, and for the application as a foreign. And I can attest to that. It's broken down into a $50 and a $25 fee on your receipt, but it's a $75 in total. And then while the Virginia Corporation Commission does not list processing times, the general consensus is 4 to 5, 10 business days. For an additional $50, there is a next day expedite. If you've submitted by 2 p.m. Eastern time, you'll get it by 4 p.m. the following business day. And then for $200, it's the same day expedite, which if you submit by 10 Eastern morning, you get it by 4 p.m. that day. The request for expedited service can only be done with online filings. You can't do it over the counter. I will say, while the consensus was this 4 to 10 business days, when we registered our foreign one, I registered late on a Thursday, and I had it Monday morning. So
that's pretty good.
That's good. That's about 3 business days. I was later on Thursday, so maybe 2 business days. So not unreasonable.
What do we do annually? And again, highlighting my earlier comments about staying current.
Yes.
So what do we have to do in Virginia to stay current once we've gotten ourselves incorporated or registered?
So in Virginia, an annual report and an annual registration fee must be filed for domestic and foreign nonprofits annually by the last day of the incorporation or registration anniversary month. So if we form now, it's April 2025. Our first reports would be due by April 30th, 2026. These reports need to include the name and address of the officers and directors. It can be business addresses. And per their fact, quote, the only officers required are your principal officers. Examples, president, vice president, treasurer, and secretary, unquote. So this is one of those instances where we've seen that you need to have the vice presidents named as well.
If you have one. It sounds like you don't necessarily have to have one, but
yeah, you don't have to. Not all foundations do, but if you have them, then they need to be in the reports. And then the fees are $25. Again, it's kind of a weird bifurcated system. As I was looking at it, you file the annual report and then you file the registration fee separately. So there's 2 different prompts as you go through the system.
All right. Any other state agencies in Virginia that we need to worry about?
There in Virginia, if the nonprofit is organized there in the state, or it's a foreign nonprofit that solicits, holds assets, or does business in the state of Virginia, you will be required to file an additional registration with the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, their Division of Consumer Protection, and then specifically their Office of Charitable and Regulatory Programs. So it's a long way to get to a simple website. They have a good link to it. And then the Virginia Department of Taxation governs all their exemptions. They have a page dedicated specifically to nonprofit organizations. And they also have a real streamlined online application process for nonprofits. So links in the show notes to all the Virginia agencies, all these forms. So the state does a good job of pulling out PDFs, links that you can just look at the forms and see what you're talking about. Again, the guide to forming and the domestic too, all of those will be there.
All right, great. Well, so that's a terrific summary of Virginia. So let's shift focus a little bit to West Virginia. How do we file our new nonprofit in West Virginia and register if we're a foreign organization soliciting there or business there?
So in West Virginia here, they have a 4-page form CD1NP. And this is from the Secretary of State. And it's an Articles of Incorporation with Nonprofit IRS attachment. They have a very long-winded way of saying that. We have our usual suspects, the name, the in-state address, your registered agent. Quick items of note, the principal and mailing address need to include the county. And for the fillable PDF, it's actually a drop-down of West Virginia counties that you have to go through. Sections 5 and 6 ask for email and web addresses. It seemed like these were probably not mandatory, but to think about, I mean, most of us have an email address that we would have set up as we're forming. Section 7 asks if it operates more than one business in West Virginia. I guess in this case, if you have more than one foundation or nonprofit, and you can decline to answer. There's a checkbox that says, I don't want to answer there. Section 8 is a checkbox that you are testing that you are indeed a nonprofit, non-stock corporation. Section 9A is your purpose box, and then 9B is a checkbox whether you will be a scrap metal dealer, which was an interesting call out, not something that's normal, and made me wonder about what exactly goes on in West Virginia. So
in their nonprofits, yeah.
Yes.
That reminds me of the IRS has a question about whether you're a tanning salon that crops up on a number of forms. These things, you can go back to the history and figure out why, but they're right. For our purposes, it's just kind of interesting little footnote.
Yes. So Section 10 is a checkbox whether you'll have members. If so, then there's space to explain how the membership works. Section 11 is for the name and address of your incorporators, which we see in most states. Section 12 is whether the nonprofit qualifies as veteran-owned. This would take a deeper delve into West Virginia law to see how a nonprofit could conceivably qualify, and a good reminder to check with local law when you're doing all your registrations. Section 13 asks how many acres of land in West Virginia the nonprofit expects to own, which again is something we've not seen. We're close to 40 states in now, and we have not seen that request before in articles. Page 4, after the signature of the incorporator, is the most important. This is where, again, they had the nonprofit IRS attachment. It's literally a 2-paragraph, quote, statement required by IRS to be included in articles of incorporation, restatement, or amendment for 501c3 status approval. And it's really the perfect language. It's just part of the form. Here's all the 501c3 language right as an attachment already. So that's kind of nice.
Yeah. That is handy.
So if you're a foreign nonprofit, they have a form CF1, which is an application for certificate of authority to be filed. This is one of those generic, again, too, for all corporations, nonprofit and profit. It's a 3-page form. Again, same basics, name, address, a West Virginia address, registered agent, your home state. As with the domestic, it asks for potentially an email and a website if you have more than one business there in the state, if you're a scrap metal dealer, and if you're veteran-owned. Section 8A asks for the purpose, and then it has checkboxes, which would be non-pertinent to a nonprofit, as it covers both profit and nonprofit organizations. Section 10A is the profit, nonprofit actual checkbox, and then 10B will ask for all your officers and directors. As with Virginia, this includes vice presidents in the request. So you will need a good standing here from your home state.
All right. So there's some interesting little quirks there. Some nice features as well. So how about the timing and cost for these filings?
So the West Virginia website does have processing times and notes. Quote, many online business filings are processed immediately, and the other filings will take less than a few days to complete, unquote. With that in mind, they do have an expedited service available as well for those online. It's $25 for a 24-hour, $250 for 2-hour, and $500 for a 1-hour. Then their filing for a domestic is $25 and then $50 for the foreign. But this goes back to talking about the veteran-owned. If you've proved that you're veteran-owned, then it's $0 for these.
Interesting. All right. Well, that's nice. So let's pivot a little bit to the annual filings, again, with our focus today on making sure we remain current once we are organized. What's our annual report timeline and cost?
So for both the domestic and the foreign nonprofits, the annual report is due in the window between January 1st and June 30th of each year following that formation or registration. So again, if we form now in April 2025, our first report will be due no later than June 30th, 2026, but I could file it as early as January 1st, 2026, just to get it off my mind.
Yeah, that's a good plan. Good way to calendar it.
And with that, it's the fee is $25, whether you're domestic or foreign. Again, with the caveat, it will be $0 if you have the veteran-owned caveat to you.
What about transparency in West Virginia? How much detail is given for the officers and directors?
So as we noted with the foreign registration, it will ask for your officers and directors, including vice presidents. And then once you get to the annual reports, that will include your domestic as well. So but within the first year, all of your officers and all of your directors will be named publicly.
With the business address?
With the business address, correct.
Gotcha. So what other states in West Virginia look at our organizations, at the nonprofits?
An additional registration with the charities division of their Secretary of State is required if the nonprofit is organized there in West Virginia, or again, does a foreign nonprofit that solicits, hold assets, or does business in West Virginia. And with that, obviously, we talked about that. They have called out whether you own land. There is something that's very specific they're watching as well. So that will come up as it says whether you hold assets or not. That's something to think about here, because they're really checking, again, against your articles. Your articles will say whether you own land, in fact, there in this. And again, not in West Virginia, but we've talked about we do have foundations that here in California that do own property. So it's something to think about here with West Virginia specifically.
Good call out. So how about the tax status for our nonprofits in West Virginia? Where do we go for exemptions?
They just have what they call their tax division there in West Virginia, and it governs all their tax exemptions. And they have a good fact which notes all the nonprofit exemptions available, and it's all in one place right down there. And also the West Virginia Nonprofit Association has a great website and a checklist for all of your West Virginia registration issues. I looked that over, and it was current, had current stuff that I could collate against. You and I know that sometimes these associations don't update that often, so you think it's a good thing until you realize all the forms are from 2010. But this was the West Virginia Nonprofit Association is really up to date with the current forms and the current rules there. So it's a good site to use. And as always, a link to that and all the relevant documents and departments are down in the show notes for West Virginia as well.
Well, thank you, Joe. Thanks for all your work putting the show notes together again. We've got quite a database now if you go across all the 20 episodes. And I guess that's right. We're at 39 because I think one of the episodes was just one was DC.
One was Washington, D.C. So we're going to hit 51 eventually.
Yeah, we're getting there. we're getting there. So with that, that's all for this episode. Be sure to check out the show notes, like we mentioned, to get the resources to the Virginias and links to earlier episodes on the states we've already covered. Also, as a reminder, if you go back to the earlier episodes for states we've already covered, be sure to check into updated laws before looking at filing or even doing your annual report in that state. As I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, Farella, Braun, and Martel has a YouTube channel, and there are several nonprofit playlists, including this one that we're building with all the state filing episodes in one place. So look for that link in the show notes as well. I'm Cynthia Rowland, and you've been listening to EO Radio Show, your nonprofit legal resource, brought to you by the Exempt Organizations Group at Farella, Braun, and Martel. If you have suggestions for topics you would like for us to discuss, please email us at eoradioshow@fbm.com. That's eoradioshow@fbm.com. Thank you for joining us, and until next time, make a difference.